Hi everyone, good evening. I've been talking on this show about leadership and the various aspects of leadership. We have talked about authenticity, we've talked about emotional intelligence, and today I thought I will share with you about a topic that's very close to my heart. All of them are, but also something that's been talked about a lot lately, and about which I think individually, professionally, as well as from a community point of view, we all need to work together. And, to be a great leader, I think you really need to learn a lot about ourselves. What are our biases? What are our conscious and unconscious biases? And, when you think about profession, when you think about business, what is the purpose of business? It really is to serve the community. At the end of the day, all the profits that a company makes and all the benefits that a company accumulates have to serve the purpose of the society as well. So the topic I really want to discuss today is about diversity. It's been talked about a lot lately. You think about diversity and inclusion is at the forefront of every company. They want to talk about making sure their workforce is diverse, that their attitudes are diverse, etc. So what I thought is today we will talk about diversity in 4 different buckets as to what does diversity actually mean. And there isn't any textbook definition of it. I will discuss something that I have learned over the years and discuss what diversity is and give you some examples. So I wanted to discuss diversity in 4 different parts. And I want to welcome everybody who's joined, and we have a lot of friends who have joined. So welcome to all of you. And so today the topic is about leadership, about diversity. So there's 4 types of diversity that I want to discuss with today, and I think we all need to learn how to embrace this idea in our own personal lives as well. So the first is diversity of people. And what I mean by this is that we all have 5 senses, and everyone is not blessed with everything intact. There are people who are blind, there are people who are deaf, there are people who are dumb, there are people who are handicapped, there are people who are paraplegic, there are people who are emotionally challenged. There's all sorts of problems in this world. And one thing I have learned is to make our environment accessible to everyone. And you think you have done it, but you have to think about it at the most core level. So let me ask a few questions. Suppose we host events, right? We host huge events. We get the most amazing people together, etc. So when we host an event, one of the things we obviously think about is people who are in a wheelchair, people who need to get there. So we want to make sure there are enough ramps, there are enough spaces to get into the conference hall. And last year when we had our conference in Suryagad, the hotel went out of their way to create ramps everywhere. Every year when we have the conference, we have one guest who comes, Aditya Kanoria, who's one of the most bright, wonderful man I know from Calcutta, and he's in a wheelchair, and he's there every year. And we want to make sure wherever we have the conference, it's accessible to him. So Suryagad went and put special ramps to get in, a room that has to be fitted, all these things. Now you think about that. But when you think of somebody who's visually impaired, we have an Inc. fellow, Tiffany Brar, and she was talking about how when you're blind and when you handle cash, we have a lot of the new notes now, right? And most of the notes are the same size. So when you're blind, it's very difficult to tell by touch which note is what, even though there are some facilities, because the size is all the same. It's difficult. If the 500 rupee note is much bigger than a 100 rupee note, is bigger than a 50 rupee note, or a 20 or a 10, to some extent it's tactile. So when we designing things, to be used on a day-to-day basis, are we thinking people who are blind? Secondly, we have, one of our future makers, Vaibhav Kothari, and he cannot hear. And so when we have events now in a Zoom or something of that sort, one square is always occupied by somebody who's doing sign language. And then he said that, whenever we have conferences, we hosted a big thing in Bombay at the Opera House. So we had the interpreter on stage because if the interpreter is at the same eye level as the audience, then you cannot look at the stage. So you need to put the interpreter at the same level as the stage. So Vaibhav has taught all these things to us to say, how do we make our environment friendly for somebody who cannot hear? How about websites? When people come to websites, how can we make sure that they have it all accessible? So there's a lot of things that have come up now, whether it is audio descriptors or text to audio or lots of things. And there are keypads that have braille. Lots of things have come now to have technology more accessible to every form of differently abled people. So number one, diversity of people. We need to accommodate for that. We need to think of everything we do and say, is this accessible for everyone? And we need to learn that. So first is diversity of people. Second is diversity of gender. And what I mean by this is, we typically, when we say gender, we talk about men and women, and there is a lot. I am going to talk about the maintaining the gender ratio and all that stuff at home. At work. But more important than that is there is many types of gender balance we need to think about. There are male, there is female. There are people who do not want to be identified as either male or female. They prefer to be called as it and not he or she. There is people in a male body who associate with being a woman. There are people in female body who associate with being a man. So if you're a man, you really associate with being a woman. You don't feel you're a man. Can you use the women's bathroom? These are all the things that we have to think about, not just from our point of view and what we are, but from the point of view of somebody who really believes that's who they are. And I learned one big thing. This is not about even accepting. This is not about even understanding. It's about just making room for somebody who thinks other than you. You don't need to, read books and try to understand them or whatever, Let everybody be and accept that the space we occupy belongs to everyone. Okay, so that's about diversity of gender. And I'll come back a little bit to some of the interesting experiments that have happened, especially in gender, at workplace. There's a lot of interesting statistics of even if you take men and women 50-50 when they start their careers, literally 10 years into that career, the women drop to almost 30 to 40% of the males. That means that there's a huge drop 3 years after starting, and there's another huge drop 6-7 years after starting. So by the time you come to the 10-year range, there's a lot of women who drop off the workforce. So what are the reasons? Obviously, they get married and they have children. These are the two things that really change the trajectory of a woman's professional life. Now, when you think about it, why should they quit after getting married? Sometimes it's because their spouse has a job that goes from place to place, country to country, and they just go along. And especially women automatically assume that if we are in a relationship, if one of us has to give up our career, the career has to be women's. Even before somebody asks, women put their hand up and take a step back. And especially after women have children, it's sort of very difficult to come back to work. Because even when you're pregnant, it's sort of people start thinking differently. People say that, oh, let's not give this project to her because now she'll go on maternity leave. So people start treating you like, very, very delicately. And actually, when I was pregnant, till the first 5 months, I didn't tell anybody at work I was pregnant because I just didn't want them to treat me any differently. And, finally, it started showing, and you can't hide it in loose shirts anymore. So I had to tell everybody. But you get treated differently. Then the second thing, after you have children, especially when you live in a place like America or so, where there isn't a big support system, etc., you have to take care of the child, or you have to send the child to childcare. So all these things become difficult. So all I want to say in diversity of gender, if you want women at work, it's not about just hiring them. It's not just about hiring them in 50-50. It's about retaining them. Companies have to work very, very hard to ensure they retain the women. That means that you have to accommodate a lot of the issues that they have and allow them to be at work. Not allow them, actually. Allow them is not the right word. To accommodate them, to make it possible for them to be at work. There's a lot of interesting services that have come to do that, and I think companies should really invest in that to make sure that the women can come to work and work on them, give support to them psychologically, emotionally, to welcome them back into work. So a lot of work still has to be done in terms of diversity of gender. And finally, as I was talking about, we have an Ink fellow, Ghazal Dhaliwal, who gave an amazing talk about identifying with a different gender and what someone goes through. And we really need to listen to talks like this to understand what it means and to, as I said, make room for everyone to coexist. You may agree, disagree, doesn't matter, but make room for everybody to coexist. The third thing is diversity of race. In India, we are very, very caste conscious. I just watched this movie called Article 15, and it was really interesting. There's a scene where the police officer in that area is talking to his whole staff. There's about 6 of them around him. And he says, they're just coming from an incident where 2 of the Dalits have been beaten up because they entered a temple. So he's just mad about this. And he says, he's talking to these guys. He asks one guy, are you a Dalit? The guy says, yeah, I'm a Dalit. He says, oh, you and that guy are the same? He says, no. In Dalits, there are different sections. So he's like the bottom and I'm like the top. And then like this, he goes around and he just gets so mad at the end that because the amount of differentiation is so deep-rooted that they won't eat together. You can't stop at a village where most of these people live and buy a bottle of water because nobody will drink the water from there. And, the distinction is really, really unbearable. So we have, in India it's caste, in US it's race, the whole revolution of right now what's going on, Black Lives Matter, etc. All this is because we make very racial, prejudicial judgments. And actually, I went to Jamna Lal Bajaj Institute, and we have a group for all my classmates, and we talk about different things. So we just were talking recently about this and diversity and etc. And Ravi Chaturvedi is one of our colleagues, and he was commenting that, and he is one of the superstars from our batch who has, gone to seniority at Procter and Gamble in the headquarters. He was like one of the 4 people who really were the most senior people at P&G, etc. So he was saying that there's a lot of stereotypes. People say that, all Asians are quiet. They are not very articulate. Or they could say that Asians are good technically, but they're not really good as managers. And so we have all these stereotypes of race, of how they look. There's brown, there's black, there's white. I mean, in India, a country where our skin color difference is only a few shades different compared to an Irish white or something like that, we are so racist about the skin color. There are many wedding ads that come up saying the person is a fair complexion. It's like mentioned, and I think recently Hindustan Livers did they took away Fair and Lovely brand, and they're trying to, at least from what I read, they're trying to not make skin color an option, or something to be desirable, fair. And so there's many things that are coming up, but diversity of race, of skin color, we have our own biases. We bias against people who have a very thick accent. We have a bias against somebody who can't speak English, maybe, who speaks in their local language. And I'll give you an example. Many years ago, I met this amazing man who was making low-cost sanitary napkins from Coimbatore. And, Tamilian accent, spoke some Telugu, some Tamil, and all that stuff. So we were talking about him giving a talk in English so everybody can understand. And he said, my English is not very good. I don't feel comfortable talking in English. So I said, it doesn't matter. Whatever your English is, let it be that. And he actually started the talk saying that, my English is not very good, but it's my English. So you have to understand my English. That talk got millions of views. And Arunachalam Muruganantham, who gave the talk, became a huge celebrity. And then they made a movie, Padman, out of his story, etc. Because that man had the courage to get up and tell a story in his own accent. And it doesn't often happen because we write off people by their accents. And it's true, Pahadi saying that we judge people before they even speak, just by the way someone looks. Are ye to gawar hai? We say that, the village guy, village idiot, whatever. How they're dressed, where they live, what car they drive in. We make judgments, snap judgments about people, about the most superficial things. So this is about diversity of race. And finally, I want to talk about diversity of thought. When we talk about diversity at work, it is extremely important for us, for the leaders, as well as the employees, team members, to be exposed to different thoughts. It doesn't matter. If you're an engineer, you should know about art and architecture and design and stuff like that. If you're a designer, you should know about business and technology. If you're a technologist, you should know about history and geography. So it's a matter of how do we have people exposed to diversity of thought? Because most of the time, all of us operate out of fear. We think somebody is not good. We get upset with somebody just because they differ from our way of thinking. If I'm a liberal, I don't like somebody who's a conservative, and vice versa. If I'm from the north, I make fun of the people from the south. If I'm from marketing, I think engineers are idiot. If I'm an engineer, I think sales guys are full of hot air. So we are all biased against people because we are operating out of fear. If somebody is so different from us, if they are really successful, that means we are wrong. And I think for generations, for millions of years, it has been in our DNA. It's survival of the fittest. So we had everything in shortage. I have to go out, I have to get the meat, I have to bring it home, I have to get the fruit, I have to get this, and whatever is there, we share it. If somebody else comes, they take a piece of it, it'll be less for us. So it's coming out of shortage. But when we move into the world today, where we have everything in abundance, we are still operating out of that fear. So everything we do is to prove the other person wrong, to make the other person wrong, because we haven't opened up our thinking. We haven't looked at the world and said, my God, look at how much there is for all of us. So if we can open up our thinking, if we can meet people who question our thinking, if we surround ourselves with people who are smarter than us, who are very different from us in age, caste, creed, color, gender, if we surround ourselves with different people, we are exposed to different thinking. And for me, that is the most important thing, is diversity of thought. Once you master this, you have a diversity of thought, you naturally are much more prone to much more sensitive to the diversity we have in race, or the diversity we have in gender, or the diversity we have about various physical abilities or mental fitness and all these kinds of things. So diversity of thought is the most important thing for me. So we talked about diversity of people, diversity of gender, diversity of race, and diversity of thought. My dream is, I want to work with corporations. I want to work with things that are home for hundreds of thousands of people, to see how can we bring this holistic diversity. Today, diversity is a checklist. You just say, okay, I have 10% women, 20% blacks, 10% something. Okay, it's done. As opposed to really embracing it and making it part of your mission. So for all of us, we think that yes, all this talk is there and there is so much progress that has come now. What else do we need to do? I will tell you 2 stories, okay, and tell you what they have done, and this will give us some ideas of what we should do in our own organizations potentially. The first one is about NASA's Hubble telescope recruiting. So what they found was that more and more male scientists were being recruited, because everybody believed, obviously, most of the male scientists are much better than female scientists. Then that premise was questioned. And what they said is that what would it take to have a very, very unbiased selection process? So what they did was they realized that male reviewers were rating female scientist proposals significantly worse than male scientist proposals. So they did 2 things. the first thing they did was they took the first names off of all the applications. So you can't tell if it's a male or a female. And they just put initials. If I'm Lakshmi Pratury, it was just LP. You can't tell if it is male, female, race, nothing. And as a second, they call it dual anonymization. So what they also did is they made sure everybody filled their applications where you cannot tell if it's filled by a male or a female. Because a lot of times without knowing, it is seen whether, you might say something, you might put in a recommendation by somebody that says that she's an excellent scientist or something of that sort. So which is a giveaway saying you are a woman. So all the recommendations, the applications, they made sure they were gender neutral. So when they did this dual anonymization, what they found is that the female candidates actually performed much better than the male candidates. So the minute they accepted the proposals in a way that you didn't know who wrote it, you actually didn't know if a male or female wrote it, then the female scientists did much better than male scientists. In another, in a completely different area, this is science, in music. In the late 70s, this is in US, in the late 70s, in the top 5 orchestras in US, in these symphony orchestras where there's could be 40, 50, 60 people, only 5%, less than 5% were women musicians. Because they said, of course, there is not as many women musicians, etc., etc. Then in 1980s, it went to like about 10%. But by 1997, almost 25 to 30% of the orchestras were filled with women. You know what they did? They did something called blind screening. They actually put a screen and the musician would perform behind the screen. So the judges who are sitting here won't know if it's a male or female who is playing the instrument. And what they actually found is that when somebody walked into the room, the women, when they wear heels versus men wearing shoes, by the footfall, the judges were biased. So they started asking the musicians to take their shoes off. Okay. So then when they did that, more and more women started getting selected. So by this, what I wanted to show you is that it is, somebody asked a question, Pahadi was asking a question about what about inclusion, So I think inclusion is about ensuring there's room for everyone at the table. First of all, there has to be an understanding of diversity. What is the holistic understanding of diversity, of people, of race, of gender, of thought? And then you have to take steps to create inclusion. That means that be it, anonymization, be it blind tests or whatever you do, you have to make sure there's no bias in accepting people. And then also there are policies put in place to keep people, and also policies put in place to advance people. So all these things have to be brought together to have a truly inclusive workforce. Having a truly inclusive workforce is not about a checklist, not about fulfilling a legal requirement. It is actually an economic advantage. Companies who are diverse are prepared for a lot of things. If you have a generation diversity, I didn't talk about ageism. There is a lot of ageism. Young people think old people are stupid. Old people think young people don't know anything. But the truth is they need each other. So when you have a workforce that is diverse in age, race, gender, thought, etc., you really have a true representation of the world, and you have a representation of thought that can catapult the company into real success out there. So I want to wrap up by It's just reminding you that the most important thing you can do right away is diversity of thought. Always know that all of us may be right in our own way, and make room for everybody to have a seat at the table. Thank you very much for your time.